Hello YouTube, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in this video I'm going to be comparing two countries, Zambia and Zimbabwe. And as a person who has traveled to both, I'm going to be sharing like my own personal experience based on like the things I'd seen and sort of like just my own judgment basically. So if there are any statistics sort of like back what I'm going to say up, please mention it in the comments below. Or if you think the same, or if you have like better ideas, please let's share those ideas in the comment section below. So let's get into it and compare these countries based on travel and tourism, sort of like on cost of things and what's better than what. So I felt like comparing Zambia and Zimbabwe would be very ideal because these countries are so close. That's one. And two, sort of like on the tourism side of things, they sort of like offer the same products because they both have access to the Victoria Falls. So they both offer the Victoria Falls as one of their major tourism. But also for sort of like national parks, I'd seen that most of them they offer the trip to Chobe, like Botswana, Chobe National Park, which is also very close to both countries. So also other activities like drifting and like bungee jumping and all of those, they sort of like offer around the same kind of services. And I think they offer the same kind of services because they sort of like have the same conditions, they have the same neighbors, they have almost the same facilities. So I feel like this is gonna be like a good fair comparison because they're sort of like on the same area. And the places that I'd stayed in the two countries, in Zambia, I'd stayed in Lusaka, but also I'd stayed in Livingstone. And in Zimbabwe, I'd only stayed in Victoria Falls. So the first thing we're going to compare is the cost of things. And I think on things, the most basic thing we can do or like see the price of, especially when you're traveling, is sort of like the cost of the local beer because most people tend to sort of like try the local beers while traveling. So in Zambia, the local beer, or at least in Livingstone, the local beer that was very common was Mosotunya, and it was so nice. Like Mosotunya is a very good beer, and I'm not even a beer fan, which is why I was very much impressed when I actually loved that beer. Like it's so nice. Please try it whenever you're in Zambia. Like you won't regret it. Like I'm being an ambassador voluntarily. Like that's how much I enjoyed the beer. Okay, back to the main topic. So the price for the Mosotunya was somewhere around like 10 kwacha on like a lot of places. And that could go up sort of like 20 kwacha on like high-end restaurants, which 10 kwacha is literally like $0.35. So that was the price for the local beer in Zambia. But in Zimbabwe, the local beer was the Zambezi beer, and the price for the Zambezi beer was sort of like around $0.75, which is literally the price for two beers in Zambia. You get one beer in Zimbabwe. And yes, Zimbabwe uses USDs, but if you compare the price of that beer in kwacha, that would be sort of like around 22 kwacha for one beer, up to 57 kwacha actually for a beer in like high-end restaurants, which is a lot. Like that's the price for sort of like 2 to 3 beers in Zambia. So on that angle, I would say like Zimbabwe was a bit expensive on sort of like drinks because I don't know why, but some were saying it's because of the inflation. Like Zimbabwe has experienced a lot of inflation in like the recent years. It's why the price of goods is so high, but maybe there are other reasons, maybe not. But from my judgment, the price of things were higher in Zimbabwe than in Zambia. Like even when you go to the grocery markets, like snacks are also like a bit steep compared to the prices that I was paying in Zanzibar. And I feel like I could notice the difference easily because I moved from Zimbabwe to Zambia. Like, so I could see the difference in like a few minutes. The second comparison you're going to do is sort of like the cost of tours. And because they sort of like have the same tours and the same experiences that they provide, it's easy to sort of like see the comparison of the prices between the two. So the cost of visiting the Victoria Falls National Park in Zambia, it was $20 for international visitors and $10 for SADC countries members. And in Zimbabwe, the cost of visiting the Victoria Falls National Park, it was $50 for international visitors and $30 for SADC member countries. Remember, SADC member countries only pay $10 in Zambia. But seeing that national park, seeing those waterfalls from the Zimbabwe side is $30. That is $20 more. So you can see like the cost is a bit steep. And maybe there's a judgment to this because during low season, you can't see much of the waterfalls from the Zambia side because when you're in Zambia side, you see Zimbabwe water, and Zimbabwe does not have a lot of water. But when you're in Zimbabwe, you see like Zambia water, and Zambia has a lot of water. But I feel like during the high season, you can see fairly among around the same stuff on both ends, but still Zambia is charging like less lower than Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe is charging literally twice the price that Zambia is charging for visiting Victoria Falls National Park. And if you see the cost of sort of like other activities like going for the Devil's Pool and the like. So, for instance, for the Devil's Pool, the company that is authorized to do the Devil's Pool experience is based in Zambia. So, if you book that trip from Zimbabwe side, you're going to have like extra costs for transportation and all of that. So, that will sort of like keep your price on the high end than someone who'd book that excursion from Zambia. But also, I don't know if I'm not sure if the comparison for the Devil's Pool experience is gonna be that much different between the countries because this activities is done by just one company, all other hotels sort of like have their own prices. So the price that I was charged in Zambia probably is a different price that someone else can get in the same country because all these middlemen, let me say, like different hotels, they offer different prices for the same service. So it's not really like a country thing. Like it's not like there's a price for booking this activity from Zambia or there's a price for booking this activity in Zimbabwe. But the main point to note is that if you book it from Zimbabwe, most likely going to be paying more because you have to pay for transportation to cross the border to enter Zambia so as you can go for the experience. The third thing I want to compare between the two countries is sort of like the vibes and the ambience and like which city or like which country is more like lively for like tourism and travel. So my judgment can be a bit screwed here because like I didn't do a lot of like social activities in Zimbabwe, but just based on like the ambience and like the people around me and what others were saying, like other travelers were saying, I would say like Livingstone is more lively and Livingstone has a better ambience for sort of like social interactions than Zimbabwe. And by Zimbabwe, I mean like the Victoria Falls town because the town is a bit deadly, actually, speaking of that. Like there are less activities sort of like there are little places like there are like less activities to do, there are less places to go to, and there weren't like that many people outside. Like I would say like in Livingstone. Like in Livingstone you could easily go to like a restaurant and find like a lot of other tourists just there. So it was sort of like very refreshing, sort of like see people around and all of that. Also it was a bit more vibe-ish than Victoria Falls. Like I was supposed to stay in Victoria Falls more days than I stayed because it just felt so much like a dead end. I was like, oh my God, I'm not staying here any longer. And then I just like left, which is why I'm saying like my judgment on the vibe thing, maybe it's wrong, maybe not, but let me know if you've been to Victoria Falls. Like, how do you find it? Like, did you feel like the vibes are a bit like, do you feel like it was a bit of like a dead town or not? Because for me it felt like a lot like a dead town, and I feel like also maybe I'm not doing like a good judgment on this on the vibes thing because I started from Zambia and then I went to Zimbabwe, and because they offer around the same activities, by the time I was in Zimbabwe I had already done most of like the touristic activities that they were offering because I just had those services in Zambia. So I was expecting them sort of like offer me something else, but then nothing. And then the clubs were also like I don't know. Maybe it's just me, maybe no. Let me know in the comments if you have an opinion or not. But if I had to make a decision based on my judgment and based on my experience, like which of the place is more lively, which of the place has a better ambience, and which of the place has better vibes, I would vote for Livingstone, Zambia over Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. On the quality of accommodation also, like I had seen a few places in both countries and I would say Zimbabwe is pricey but the quality is really low. Like for Zimbabwe you could pay like a lot of money for like a mediocre room, which you would have gotten like a good room in Zambia. And this actually, I even had another guy like complain about the same stuff. Like the first day that I arrived in Zimbabwe, I went to the supermarket and then while I was checking in at the hotel, I'd met this guy also checking in, and then we just said hi over, And then later when I got to the supermarket, I bumped into him again. So we sort of like started talking, having a small talk. And then he asked me like what's my views on Zimbabwe so far. I was like, I just got here, so I don't know much. But apparently he had been there for sort of like a week before, and he was just like moving from one hotel to another, and he was sort of like complaining about the quality that Zimbabwe offers. That like they offer the shittiest hotel for the highest prices, while in Zambia you can get like a decent hotel for that same price that in Zimbabwe you're getting like a shit place. So when it comes to cost of accommodation, I would say also, Zambia is better than Zimbabwe. And I'm not sure if this is basically on like the inflation side of things or it's just how things are done up there. But maybe inflation has a part to do with it. But Zimbabwe, Livingstone sort of like gives you the value for the money on accommodation that you would get in like Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. I would also like to compare the two countries based on like availability of taxis. And I mean, like if you're going to visit like any of these towns, you should be warned that they don't use like the tax apps, or at least that was by December 2024. They were not using the taxing apps like Uber, Bolt, Yangos, and the likes. So you just have sort of like heli tax on the way, or sort of like get a number of a local tax driver, and so that you can like call him when you want to like get the services. And this was the same for both of them. So it was okay. And I feel like taxis were very available, like, and the places felt, at least for me, I never felt like I'm in danger at any point. So they felt safe and taxis were available. But you have to be warned that there are no taxi drivers or anything, and there are a certain time where it's harder to find taxis. So the best and safe way for you to do it's sort of like get a phone number from one of the drivers that will serve you, and then you can like call them whenever you need the service. I feel like that's the best approach, at least in these small towns. Also, in both countries, because most of the places are sort of like separated by the parks, like the national parks. So though locals walk from place to place, they don't advise you travelers or tourists sort of like walk from place to place because you could like interact with like wild animals and they could harm you or like anything could happen. So like the best place is just get a taxi driver's number. It's gonna save you like a lot of trouble, a lot of worries and all that. I'd love to hear from like other travelers that have traveled from like the two countries and if they have like any opinions about like Zambia and Zimbabwe, like in comparison, which do you think is better? Like I would really love to hear from others because I love those two places and I would really love to go back to Livingstone, but I want to hear like more thoughts about other people that have visited Livingstone and Victoria Falls, like what they say about the countries and like how they found it, how the experiences were, like what they have done better if they had to go again in those places. Yeah. So that's it for this video, guys. Until next time, adios.